And so today's topic is going to be mistakes people make when they are trying to improve their gut health. Gut health is a major topic. Everybody knows that they need to improve their gut health, but they fall into traps in trying things that may or may not be suitable for them. And I see that a lot in my practice. People come in with a list of supplements that they've been taking, different things they've tried. There's so much information out there that it's the trial and error. They try this fad, that fad. And when they come in, they've got this list of 20 things that they're taking, trying to improve their gut health. And so the message is clear that we need to do this, right? We need to improve our gut health. But there's still so much confusion as to how do I do that? What do I do? And so today we're going to talk about that. We're going to bust some myths and talk about some data that backs up what the best strategies are for you. And so mistake number one that most of my clients, that I've noticed that many of my clients, I won't say most, but most of my clients with heartburn fall into this trap of taking antacids and what are called H2 blockers, such as Protonix, omeprazole, or just Zantac over the counter, different things that buffer the stomach acid. And this is problematic in a couple of ways, right? So it provides immediate relief, right? So if you have really bad heartburn, it's keeping you up, it's preventing you from eating, foods that you would want to eat. It makes sense to just pop an antacid and you'll feel better and you'll be able to eat whatever you want and you won't have the heartburn. The problem with antacids are that they actually prevent proper digestion and absorption of food. And so you kind of get this, immediate relief here, bigger problem later over there. And so what I caution my clients about is before you pop antacids, ask yourself why you're having heartburn. And the answer is usually, well, my stomach acid is too high. And then the question is, well, why is your stomach acid too high, right? The body is smart. It knows how much acid you need or don't need. And so why would it suddenly produce more acid than what it needs, right? We have to ask ourselves, why is the body behaving in a way that is not balanced? And often the answer is actually that it's not your stomach producing more stomach acid. It's your body making more lactic acid. And so there's more acid, but it's not the acid that you think it is. It's a different kind or different form of acid. And so then we have to ask the question, well, why is that happening? Why is my body making more lactic acid and making me think that it's making more stomach acid? Like, what's happening? And so the next question is, well, is there an infection in the stomach or in the small intestine that is producing acid? And often when there's a bacterial infection or even a parasitic infection, the inflammatory responses that occur in the body, the way that the immune system is triggered, it causes there to be less circulation, less oxygen flow. And when there's less oxygen flow, you get more lactic acid. So the acid that your stomach makes is called hydrochloric acid. Lactic acid is a byproduct of abnormal metabolism. Abnormal metabolism will occur in the face of abnormal things like infections, for example, or the inability for you to take in enough oxygen. And so people often confuse stomach acid with lactic acid being produced from infections. Or other, abnormal things going on in the stomach, so you could potentially have an ulcer. And again, a lot of people assume that the ulcer is from, too much hydrochloric acid production in the stomach, but it's not. It's actually from too much lactic acid production in the stomach. And 80% of the time, or even some studies are suggesting 90% of the time, when you have heartburn or an ulcer to the point where you have to take antacids, you actually have an infection in your bowel. It's not random heartburn. It's not your stomach not knowing what it's doing and making too much acid. And so the reason the antacids feel better, obviously, is because whether it's lactic acid or hydrochloric acid, it doesn't matter. If you put something that tempers the acid, you will feel better. The problem with that is if you have an infection raging in your either your stomach or in your small intestine that affects your stomach, then you will continue to have malabsorption. You will continue to have poor digestion, but you won't feel it because you're masking the symptom with an antacid. So it's not that you want to feel it, right? You don't want to feel the heartburn and having an upset stomach all the time and not being able to sleep or eat the foods you want. But what you do want to do is treat the infection, right? You want to find out if you have an infection and then treat that. And then the heartburn will go away because you've now solved the reason why the body was being inundated with lactic acid. And so that's a really important thing that a lot of people just don't know because unfortunately it's not discussed at a mainstream medical doctor's office. The idea that the small intestine can even have an infection is foreign in medical school. It is just now becoming discussed because the data is just becoming so clear that it can no longer be ignored. So Mount Sinai in New York City has studied small intestine bacterial overgrowth. Cleveland Clinic in Ohio has studied it. I believe Columbia University, NYU. So there are very prominent academic institutions now saying, yeah, this small intestine infection thing is real and it needs to be addressed. And it does take time for new data to trickle down to the doctor's office. And so many people who go to the doctor, even gastroenterologists who are specialists in the stomach, the small intestine, the large intestine, will not recognize this infection because when they went to medical school, it was understood that it's not possible for the small intestine to get infected because it's sterile. And this is what I learned as well, going to medical school. We learned that there's no way that there can be an infection there. It's a sterile environment, right? But that by definition is an infection, right? Is when bacteria get into a sterile environment and make it no longer sterile, right? That's the whole definition of infection. So it was, not the correct thinking when we studied in medical school, but it's what is understood, and as I studied integrative medicine more and more, I realized that a lot of what we learned in medical school is dogma, not really backed by a lot of science. It was just tradition passed down from generation of doctors to other generations of doctors. But as we started to actually study and understand the small intestine, we started to understand, oh, wait, there can be infection in this place. And if there is infection in this place, it's a really big deal. The small intestine is probably the most important part of your entire intestine in terms of absorbing vitamins, minerals, and other nutrients into your body. The large intestine is really important too. It absorbs water. It also defends you. It's an immune system in and of itself with the microbiome, the good bacteria that live there serve as a defense so that what ends up in your body is pure. And so that bacteria don't end up going into your body and that they stay in the intestines if they happen to get through the defenses. And so the large intestine plays a critical role. But as far as absorbing your food, it's actually the small intestine that is most important. And so many diseases that people get as they age is actually because the small intestine is not absorbing nutrients properly. And as we discussed in our last two podcasts, where we talked about treating fatigue with 5 simple questions, absorption of nutrients is everything. It is the be all and end all of your health. If you cannot absorb nutrients, you will get sick. It's just a matter of time. And so making sure that absorption and digestion is very well protected is critical for long-term health. And also to treat fatigue, prevent diseases. It goes on and on. And so what we're recognizing now is upwards of 70 to 90% of people who have any gastrointestinal symptoms, heartburn, bloating, loose stools, constipation, up to 70 to 90% of those people have an infection in their small intestine that they don't know they have. And there's not yet enough attention being paid to this in mainstream medicine for people to actually get the help that they need fast enough. And so the system of medicine that does recognize that the small intestine can get infected is the field of integrative medicine or holistic medicine, which was formally accepted in the year 2014 as a medical specialty. And again, I say this a lot because it's so important, because people still just don't quite know how important this field of medicine is. It's a big deal to be a field of medicine where you can get formal board certification, because that is in and of itself attesting to the massive amount of medical science and data that is supporting that field. So just as you would go see a cardiologist who's board certified, you can now go see an integrative medical doctor who is also board certified. And whenever I talk about integrative medicine, I always have to talk about internal medicine, because people confuse them as the same, because they can both serve as a primary care physician, right? But the field of internal medicine is not the same as integrative medicine. Integrative medicine is holistic. Internal medicine is mainstream medicine. So an internist is someone who diagnoses and treats diseases. The small intestine bacterial overload is not yet recognized as a disease. So it is not something that an internist would diagnose. It's also not something that a gastroenterologist would diagnose. So a gastroenterologist is a specialist in the gastrointestinal system who obtains board certification in that field. And again, because it is not yet recognized as a disease by that field of medicine, they will not diagnose it and treat it very often. So once in a while, we'll find a gastroenterologist who will do a breath test to diagnose this infection and will treat it. Unfortunately, oftentimes the treatment is to use antibiotics. In the field of integrative or holistic medicine, we understand that that's not necessary, and that could even be harmful to the large intestine and the delicate balance of good bacteria that are there. And so, we have a question. Is yeast a product of infection? I got a lot of tummy issues and yeast infections, usually at the same time. So yes, you can have yeast in the gastrointestinal system. You would want to be, of course, tested for that. You can be tested for that with a stool culture. So you just have to specifically make sure that your physician asks for a test for yeast. The breath test that diagnoses the small bowel infection will not diagnose yeast in particular. They'll just say yes or no, there is an infection. It won't distinguish if it's yeast or bacterial. A stool sample could potentially diagnose and distinguish the two. Excuse me. So yes, you can have a yeast infection in your gut. We've diagnosed that quite a bit. It is a sign that there is significant immune compromise in the gut. And so you want to make sure that if you are diagnosed with a yeast infection, you don't just treat the yeast infection, you also have to support the gastrointestinal system appropriately. The best way to do that is to be tested in the field of integrative or holistic medicine. There are breath tests that can be done. There are stool tests that can be done that are very different than what you would get with mainstream medicine. Mainstream medicine, we would culture you for bacteria and yeast and parasites. In integrative medicine, what we do that's different is we actually test bowel function as well. So we test to make sure that you're producing adequate enzymes. We can test your stomach acid. We can test the microbiome itself. The microbiome is the very delicate balance of good bacteria that live in the large intestine. They can be tested for their function. So you want to make sure they're there, but you also want to make sure they're functioning, right? So when you hire somebody to work, in a place of work, you want to make sure that they're not just there, but actually working, right? And so it's the same thing in the gut. You want to make sure that they're there and actually working. And so there are tests in integrative stool analysis that can test for those things. They can also test for inflammation, different types of inflammation. They can test for leaky gut, whether the integrity of the gut lining has been compromised by infection, or the lactic acid production and what we call hypoxia in that environment from lack of oxygen use can damage the lining of the gut. The gut has a very important lining because it's a defense so that bacteria and yeast and toxins don't just flow right through your gut into your bloodstream and go out through the rest of your body. That would be extremely dangerous. And so the gut has a lining in it that it should be an impenetrable fortress for toxins and bacteria and other microbes that we don't want seeding into the human body. But if there's infection present for too long, or if there are toxins that we inhale and eat, like pesticides and other things, that lining will be slowly chipped away and it will start to disintegrate and there will be holes in it. We call that leaky gut. Leaky gut doesn't just happen. It has to have a cause, right? And so you don't want to just treat the leaky gut. You want to treat what caused the leaky gut. Just like you don't want to just treat heartburn, you want to treat what caused the heartburn. And so if you don't do that, then what happens is you just get the heartburn back, right? And that's why many people on antacids can't get off the antacids. As soon as they stop them, the heartburn comes back because we didn't actually treat the cause of the heartburn, right? The cause of the heartburn wasn't that your stomach was making too much acid. It is simply that there's something else producing metabolic acid, lactic acid, that is not yet being treated. So we want to make sure that we treat the root as well as help the symptoms at the same time. And so that's a wonderful question. Thank you. Let me see. I think we have time for one more before our first break. Lactic acid, never knew, but thinking back when I suffered from heartburn, I usually had bathroom difficulties. So wouldn't adding more yogurt to my diet help? Sometimes. Again, I always say it depends, right? So if you are dairy intolerant, you probably don't want to have yogurt. So you might want to have an almond milk based yogurt. You can have a coconut milk based yogurt. Excuse me. So you want to watch the dairy if you are dairy intolerant. But you could have a yogurt alternative. Again, and going back to the last two podcasts, if you are a cold metabolic type, you don't want to eat a lot of yogurt, right? Because that's cold. And so you might even want to warm it up. I know that probably sounds gross, but when they make yogurt, they cook it first, right? So you could potentially warm it up and then have it. Of course, you don't want to warm it up too much, but you can just bring it up to room temperature and have it if you are a cold metabolic type. If you are a hot metabolic type, then go ahead. But just again, watch the dairy. So if you are dairy intolerant, make sure you have an alternative to dairy as a form of yogurt. But you can do that. The other thing that you'd want to do is also consume what are called prebiotics. And so yogurt has probiotics, but you also want to consume prebiotics. And prebiotics are types of sugar or carbohydrates that we don't digest necessarily as calories, but that the bacteria that we want to be in our gastrointestinal system protecting us do eat. So it's like fertilizer for them. And it doesn't contribute to bad bacteria. So prebiotics are very helpful. And so some prebiotics are green plantains that you could boil and eat like a root vegetable, green bananas as well. You can boil them and eat them like a root vegetable. Also white rice that you cook and cool, and white potatoes that you cook and cool are prebiotics. And again, if you're a cold metabolic type, you want to be careful after you've cooled them to let them warm back up to room temperature before you eat them. Or just avoid them and have oatmeal, which is another prebiotic, right? Or you could have the boiled green plantains and green bananas as prebiotics. So wonderful question. So I think we had another question here. Let's see. Arthritis, is that an indication of other health issues? Yes. So nothing really ever happens in a vacuum in your body, right? Your body is one connected whole. So whether you have an issue in your pinky finger or anywhere else in your body, it's actually affecting your entire body because it's one connected whole. And so, it may be just an area that sticks out and stands out because, maybe you had some trauma to that area in the past. So the circulation wasn't ever really wonderful. So that would be the place that would be affected where the arthritis would show up, right? But arthritis is a sign of inflammation pretty much everywhere, right? And one of the main places it begins is in the gut. And so gut health is very much related to arthritis. It's also related to sinus issues, teeth issues. It's kind of a chicken and egg game, right? One feeds off the other. But oftentimes the starting point, the root, is the gut. And then when the gut gets out of balance, it creates the other issues in the other locations. And then that starts a vicious circle. So when you want to break the circle, it's actually better to get to the original starting point, if possible, as opposed to focusing on the thing that actually hurts, right? So while it's the pinky that hurts or the thumb or whatever it is that hurts and it's drawing our attention, we have to always ask ourselves, well, what's causing that? Gosh, I don't know, 7 or 8 times out of 10, it's going to be the gut, right? And again, any gut symptom is a clue. Heartburn, bloating, belching, flatulence, loose stools, constipation. All of it are signs that something's not quite right. And so you would know, okay, it's my gut. That's really the starting point here. So yes, it's a sign of other health issues. And I tell my clients, if we can identify what's going on in the gut, treat that successfully in a harmless way. In other words, not use antibiotics, not use steroids, not use antacids and things that actually cause you to take steps backwards instead of forwards, then we can really fix a lot of other things. Fixing your gut can help you prevent cancer. Fixing your gut can help you prevent Alzheimer's. Fixing the gut can even prevent autism. There's a lot of data to show that autism is a toxicity problem. And so one of the main major lines of defense against toxins is the gut. And children are born with an undeveloped gut. According to traditional Chinese medicine, children's guts don't mature until the age of 8. And so being extremely cautious with what we feed them, with what we expose them to at those vulnerable ages is extremely important for them. Even attention deficit disorder can be prevented through, gut health and promoting gut health. And so that's another great question. Question from YouTube. Can the stomach lining completely heal? Yes, only if you treat the cause of why the lining was damaged, though. And then you continue to treat the cause, because oftentimes the cause doesn't permanently go away, right? We're not going to get rid of every toxin that could potentially affect the gut. And so there's always this acute situation of fixing the acute problem. And then there's the maintenance, and the maintenance goes on forever, right? Never stops, because the toxins never stop, right? Stress never stops, seemingly. And so we can't really ever stop promoting gut health. And then we have to exercise, I call this healthy paranoia. We have to have a healthy paranoia or a self-awareness as to when, if we start getting bloating again, and it's not just a one-off where it's, okay, I ate something bad yesterday, I had bloating today, now it's completely gone. If it's something that's persistent or repetitive, there's a pattern. You don't want to sit on that. You don't want to say, well, let me see what happens later. It's just going to snowball into other things. So you want to hit it early if something is going on. But yes, you can heal the stomach lining. It's just a matter of putting in more good stuff than bad stuff, and having more healing than damage go on, if that makes sense. So every breath we take is partly healing us, partly damaging us, right? Because we're inhaling toxins. We're also inhaling good oxygen. And so there's this, battle, two sides of a coin every time we take a breath. And so we just have to understand that. We don't have to be paranoid about it. We don't have to be afraid of it. We just have to know, okay, so I know that this goes on. So I just need to make sure that every day I am promoting something that will remove those toxins, that will help my gut to heal. So if it's, yogurt, kombucha, prebiotics, if it's getting tested because you have symptoms that are not going away, it's getting tested and being treated, getting tested for a small bowel infection in particular. A lot of times what comes out in our stool didn't really originate in our stool. It originated in the small intestine and trickled down into the stool. And so we end up treating the bacteria that we find in the stool. But meanwhile, there are several other bacteria that are in the small intestine that we miss because we don't treat them when we're treating just the stool. So even if I do a stool analysis for my clients and I find 2 bacteria in the stool, I make the assumption that they are present because of a small bowel infection, because small bowel infections are just that common. Again, 9 out of 10 people in certain populations have a small bowel infection. And so I make the assumption, if I see bacteria in stool, that they have a small bowel infection, because the math just adds up and says, yeah, it's very likely that they have an infection. Now, if we want to really confirm that, we do a breath test to confirm that it's a small bowel infection, because that will isolate the infection to the small bowel based on the breath testing. And so you just want to have a very, I call it a healthy paranoia, a self-awareness to really continue to move forward in the endeavor of keeping the gut healthy. And so, mistake number 2 that a lot of clients make is that they take probiotics without testing. And probiotics are touted as, very healthy. And it's not that they're not healthy, but if you don't need them, they can cause harm. Again, Chinese medicine teaches us that everything is about balance. So even a good thing can become a bad thing if it's overutilized or if it's underutilized, right? So if something's too low, we have problems. If something's too high, we have problems. I talk about this with estrogen a lot, or thyroid hormone, right? If you don't have enough thyroid hormone, that's a problem, right? You're going to be exhausted. You're going to be prone to diseases. Your mental clarity and focus will not be normal. If you have too much thyroid hormone, you are going to have, all kinds of problems in the other direction. You're going to have anxiety, palpitations. You're not going to be able to sleep. You're not going to be able to focus because your brain is racing. And so too little or too much is a problem. So I like to test my clients to make sure that they actually need probiotics. And when the testing started to become available, what I realized is a lot of people don't actually need probiotics, and so we started moving to prebiotics more. Oftentimes, what you find when you test the microbiome is there are certain families of the microbiome that are overgrown. There's too much of them. And then other families where there's too little of them. And so if you give someone probiotics, what you're doing is you're promoting the too much and the too little. So you're bringing the too little back into balance, but you're sending the too much off the rails. And so that actually increases the risk of an infection. And so what I've learned is more likely than not, people actually don't need probiotics because of the imbalance. Some are overgrown, some are undergrown. So when you have something that's overgrown and something else that's undergrown in the same environment, you want to just promote the undergrown. You don't want to make the overgrown more, right? And so prebiotics are the best approach for that, so that you fertilize this family so that it can grow. The fertilizer is not going to force the overgrown bacteria to keep growing, right? They have a means of keeping themselves in check. But if you're throwing more of them down into the gut in the form of probiotics, they can't exercise that option because they're getting dumped on, if that makes sense. And so you want to just fertilize the area and let the microbiome figure itself out. And it's extremely intelligent and it can actually do that. And so I've realized with testing, the availability of testing, most people don't need probiotics. I have a very small handful of clients who actually need probiotics. In other words, when you test them, all of the families of their good bacteria are too low, all of them. None of them are overgrown. Those people need probiotics, right? But only even for a specific period of time, not forever. And so at some point, if you fertilize them with the probiotics, so you give them probiotics and prebiotics, while all the families are too low, there comes a point where they start to feed off of each other. And the microbiome is actually much more resilient than we think. And it can actually balance itself again if we provide it with the right nourishment, right? And remove the toxins that would kill it off, they'll grow. And so that's what I've learned is a common mistake that we even used to make in the integrative medicine world, right? Is we would give everybody probiotics, especially if they took antibiotics. And what we're finding out is, oh, that's probably still not a good idea. And so we're doing prebiotics mostly, unless you're tested and you're flatlined on all of your good bacteria, you do not want to take probiotics. Now, does that mean you can't have yogurt and kombucha? No, the amount of probiotics in those drinks and foods is so low that you're not going to do damage. But when you're taking, 20 billion, 100 billion, 250 billion bugs as a form of probiotic, that's going to be, a problem. And so, more questions. Let's see. Question. I have a reflexologist who works a lot on my feet to heal my gut. Yet, although it seems to work for a bit, I have to schedule another session a week later. Yeah, and so anything, even acupuncture, reflexology, we have a machine that we have from Germany called OnDemand, and it's a pulsed EMF machine. You still have to treat the underlying cause, right? And so those machines are excellent for rebalancing you. But if the cause of the imbalance is still present, you'll just go right back out of balance, right? We see that a lot with chiropractic care. So, I have clients who say, gosh, I have to keep going back to the chiropractor. Well, that's because the reason that your muscles are tensing has not yet been treated, right? You can't just realign the spine and expect it to stay that way unless you relax the muscles, right? Unless you metabolically relax the muscles. So going for a massage is great. That's all great. But if you are not resolving the metabolic problem that exists inside the muscle cells, they will just tense up again, right? And that boils down to, guess what, right? The gut. So in other words, those muscle cells get tense because they are not properly fed and oxygenated, right? And so the gut has a lot to do with that, because that provides the nutrients that go in those cells. And then the oxygen is then allowed into the cells once those nutrients are present. And then your muscle cell can contract and relax properly, right? Because that's what it does. It's supposed to contract and relax. And if it cannot do that, if you have vitamin deficiencies, it will contract because acid will make it do that. But then it will not relax. And so that's the reason that there's malalignment in a lot of people's spines. And that's also the reason that when you get treatments, they don't stick, they don't last. So we have to get to the insides of the cells through proper nutrition and proper oxygenation. And that has to be done through the gut. So a lot of times when people tell me a story like what this YouTube watcher is saying, that I go get reflexology and I have to go back, you then need to also see an integrative medical doctor who can test your gut and see if there's an infection present, see if there's leaky gut as a result of that infection. And then you have to systematically treat the roots while supporting the gut. And then the reflexology will stick, right? It will stick. In other words, after a specific prescribed number of treatments, you won't have to keep going back over and over again, as long as your gut stays healthy, right? And so that's what I've learned. No matter what awesome equipment we use, whether it's acupuncture, reflexology, whatever it is, we still have to metabolically correct the cells of the body regardless. Because if we're not, if the machine or the technique that's being used is not supported by the body metabolically, the body can't respond permanently, if that makes sense, or long term. And so that's why those treatments don't work as long. It's not that they're not working. They are working. They are doing what they are meant to do. It's just that the body is so out of balance that it just keeps snapping back out of balance until you get into those cells and correct what's wrong with those cells. So I hope that answered your question. That's a great one. Question, my old man says my going barefoot around our trailer probably gave me worms. Of course, he just doesn't like me barefooted. He likes shoes, but honestly, I began to worry a bit. Can I develop problems with worms? And can I take a vitamin or probiotic to make sure they die? Well, yeah, I mean, it's not so much going barefoot that would do that, so much as having a compromised immune system. Right? We are designed to run around barefoot, right? We weren't born with shoes. And so, this idea that if we don't protect ourselves with man-made stuff, we're going to die isn't necessarily always true, right? But if we have a compromised immune system and we do that, yeah, we might have some problems, right? So if you're diabetic, you have to be very careful about walking around barefoot, because if you injure your foot, right, if there's a cut, very easy for bacteria and things to get in there and cause, problems. But I'm not aware of going barefoot causing worms. What's more likely to cause worms is food that you're eating that is perhaps inadequately, cooked, in combination with an immune system that can't handle killing them, right? And so you'd want to, of course, be tested for that and then be properly treated. And there are natural agents. There's almost no infection that can't be treated with a natural agent, unless it's severe, right? If your life is in imminent danger, or you have an underlying medical condition, which makes it very difficult for your immune system to be recruited to fight an infection, then yes, you may have to take antibiotics. That may just have to be what you do. However, oftentimes, if something is mild, not compromising, your immediate well-being, not life-threatening, there are plenty of natural agents that will work properly, right? Artemisia being one. It's used to treat malaria and other things. So there are quite a few natural options, but you want to be under the care of a board-certified integrative medical doctor and not do a trial and error trying to correct those things on your own. So I hope that helps. But no, going barefoot is great, as long as, again, diabetes is probably the biggest cautionary, the biggest caution to exercise if you're diabetic. But yeah, going barefoot is great because that allows you to connect with the planet. The planet's just a gigantic battery that provides electrons through the human body. We know that we are an electrical field, right? A bag of water with current flowing through us. And so being planted firmly on the earth is actually quite important. So if you happen to not be able to be barefoot because of an underlying medical condition, or maybe it's too cold where you live, then you can get a grounding pad and you sleep on it. You just put it on your bed and you sleep on it for 8 hours, 9 hours a night, and it will pump electrons into your body. And that will help boost your immune system, help you sleep. It's been a game changer for a lot of my clients. Florida just had a bad hurricane, yes. And the kids and I are working on cleaning and drying our home. Everything is still damp. My friend said I need to leave my home due to concerns about mold and dampness. Is there something I could take to help our immune system? We can't leave. Well, first of all, I'm terribly sorry to hear that. And, our thoughts and prayers, light and love go out to everyone who's been impacted by this storm, both here and, Fiona in Puerto Rico. And so I hope that everyone is safe and is able to get back to, living their lives and even improving upon what they had before the storm. Sometimes, the silver lining is we rebuild something better. And I do hope that that is, in fact, what occurs for everyone impacted by these recent storms. But that's a tough question. Yes, you can certainly take a lot of things that can boost your immunity. Probably the most important thing is to change your air conditioning filters often, way more often than you normally would. HEPA filters in particular, and a very highly rated one that will filter out everything. Yes, it makes your air conditioner work harder. This is a funny story. I went to Home Depot to get new air conditioning filters, and I couldn't find the rated ones that I wanted. And so this really nice gentleman is coming down the aisle, and he's like, "Oh, can I help you find something?" And I said, "Yeah, please. Do you have a 10 rated, filter in this brand?" And he was like, "Oh, yeah, but that's going to make your air conditioner work harder, right?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah, I'd rather my air conditioner work harder than my lungs," right? So I was like, the air conditioner can do all the hard work. I want my lungs to have it nice and smooth. And so, he chuckled with me. He's like, "Yeah, that's true." And, so he helped me find the better rated filter. So that's what I would recommend. They are more expensive. It's true, but having bad lungs is way more expensive than air conditioning filters. Not being able to properly breathe and oxygenate the body is much more expensive than, highly rated AC filters. And so I would recommend definitely highly rated AC filters, change them much more often than you think. So if they're rated for 3 months, I would change them in 1 month, especially, with the dampness in the home and things like that. You'd want to get a specialist in there, of course, to make sure that there is no mold creeping into the walls and, seeping into the drywall, that type of thing. So, that's way beyond the scope of what I do as a medical physician. But I would definitely recommend that you call a company to help you assure that there's no mold, forming in places where they should not. And to boost immunity, there's so many things, right? Hard to say exactly what to take, right? So just about every vitamin is important for the immune system. So I would take a really good multivitamin, very clean, organic if possible. With probably some added vitamin D, added vitamin C. 5,000 units of vitamin D is not a bad thing to do. You're not going to overdose on that if you take it for, a brief period of time. I have personally never seen a vitamin D overdose. We test cellular levels at our practice. And so blood work can often be deceiving and give you the impression that something is too high. But then when you check the cells, you see that the levels are actually normal. And so I've never had anyone with a vitamin overdose. But that doesn't mean you should take a ton of vitamin D, right? Everything is in balance. And so 5,000 units a day should be good. Extra vitamin C is also probably recommended at this point. It'd be hard to say, to be honest, what is it specifically that you should do to boost immunity? But of course, keeping your home extremely well ventilated, is critical. Making sure that you're washing things often in hot water, making sure your water is properly filtered, boiled, whatever needs to be done to make sure that the water sources are as clean as possible. Those would be my recommendations. I always tell people it's better to be tested so you know exactly how to boost your immune system, right? There are so many vitamins and minerals involved with the immune system that guessing is typically not useful. And you end up spending a bunch of money on supplements and not really covering what you actually need. And so getting what's called a micronutrient panel to see where you are would be most highly recommended. And then you would know specifically what supplements you need to take, which ones you don't need. And then you would also know how much of each one that you need to take. So I hope that answered that question for you. And again, I wish you all the best, sending light and love, and really anticipating that you will bounce back and be stronger, more resilient, and have an even better life than before the storm. So thank you for that question. I think there was one more. Cancer being connected to gut health. Oh my God. So what do I do first? Give up junk food. I've tried, failed. What's one thing I could do that might help me get my wagon back on the trail? And with me back on the wagon. Yeah, well, honestly, the best thing is to fall into the lap of a board certified integrative medical doctor. I mean, honestly, that's the best starting point, because the last 20 years has convinced me, trial and error does not work. It just does not work. You have to really know what you're treating and why. And then you can target that, right? So if you don't know whether or not you have a gut infection, you don't know where to begin. There's no way to know where to begin, right? So getting properly tested through an integrative medical doctor would be, absolutely the best way, if not the only way, right, to get your wagon back on the trail. Not to get you back on the wagon, right? That's a mindset thing, right? So people getting on the wagon is coming to the mindset of, I need to do whatever it takes for me to be healthy. I need to be, in love with myself enough that I will do whatever it takes to be healthy, to get on the wagon and stay on the wagon, right? We all fall off the wagon. That's just being human. And then I will bounce back onto the wagon as soon as possible, right? So that's really the goal. And it's a mindset thing. So the first barrier for a lot of people is, it's not covered by insurance and I don't want to pay for it, right? And I tell people, you're going to pay for it one way or the other. You're really going to pay for it one way or the other. There's no way around that. That's what I have learned in 20 years of practice, is we pay for it one way or the other. So the question is, do I want to pay to be healthy, or do I want to pay to be sick? And that's really the question to ask yourself. And when you approach the question from that angle, like people think, well, if I don't spend the money now, I'll save it, right? You won't save it. You're going to spend it one way or the other. Because being sick is currently the new default in the United States of America, right? More people are sick than are healthy. And so the idea that if I just do these basic things, I'll be okay and I can save my money, is now a flawed premise. And so we have to say, how do I want to spend my money? I'm going to spend it anyway. Do I want to spend it on staying healthy, or do I want to spend it on being sick? And being healthy means I can play with my kids, I can hike, I can exercise, I can travel, I can do whatever I want to do. I can open up that new business. I don't have to have the threat of being sick and having my business fail. That's being healthy, right? Being sick is, I feel lousy, I'm tired all the time. I have this mountain of medications I'm taking. Each of them has their own little, side effect profile that I have to deal with. And then I get prescribed another medication for the side effect from this one medication, right? And so and then I just don't feel well. I'm in pain all the time, or I can't sleep, or I can't play with my kids. I can't play with my grandkids. I can't travel because I can't keep up with the group, right? If that's what you want to pay for, then that's a choice, right? And that's really the choice that we have to make today is, what do I want to pay for? It's not, do I want to pay for it? It's, what do I want to pay for? Because the money's coming out one way or the other. And so the mindset thing is, I'm going to pay for this one way or the other. I'm going to pay for my choice to either take care of myself now, or I'm going to pay for my choice of not having taken care of myself and being sick. And so it's a harsh thing for people to hear, but I've learned that actually helps people. And it's not as cruel as I thought it was, to tell people you're going to spend it one way or the other, right? We know that spending money on diseases is about $11,000 a year per disease, and that's with insurance coverage, right? And so the math is really adding up that we should take better care of ourselves. Let me see, out of time. All right, Rachel. So thank you, everyone. I hope you found this podcast to be very helpful. And until next time, many blessings. Thank you for listening.